Okay, today guys we're going to be screeding a piece of floor. I'm going to show you exactly what a dry sand and cement screed is. Now there are lots of different types of sand, but the ones that are mostly used in construction are your building sand, used mostly for bricklaying, your plastering sand and your sharp sand. Now the building sand is a very soft sand. The plastering sand is a fine sharp sand, and the floor laying sand, which is in the mauve pack here, is a coarse sharp sand. Here you've got your building sand, which is a very soft sand, almost like demerara sugar in texture, definitely not in flavour. Then you've got your fine sharp sand, normally a little bit more yellow, and the texture, when you feel this, if you rub it between your thumb and finger, you can feel the coarseness, little bits of grit. Whereas if you do that with soft sand, it doesn't feel the same. And then finally you've got your coarse sharp sand, and this is what you use for a dry mix when you're floor screeding. I've only recently had to actually use this on a wall because I couldn't get any fine sharp, and it was an absolute nightmare. It's like spreading the beach onto a wall. I just used it as a scratch coat and I managed to get some fine sharp in the end. But this is your coarse sharp, and if you look closely you can see got quite a few little stones in it, like these here, and they're mixed throughout the mix. This is also used as a ballast, mixed with some bigger stones and cement to give you a concrete. So, as I say, this is slightly darker. There's the stones there. It's full of those. This is a slightly darker mix, darker than the other two. Now, for a dry mix, you'll take your coarse sharp sand, and put that into your bucket first. Now we're working on an approximate 3:1 ratio mix, so 3 times as much sand as we've got cement. So that's my cement in an old sandbag. But that's roughly 3 lots of sand to 1 lot of cement. Now, unlike when you're doing an ordinary wet mix, which if you're doing that in a bucket, I would add the water to that first, because this is a dry mix. You put your sand in, your cement in, and then basically you give that a good mix up while the mix is dry. So at this stage there is no water with this mix. You can do it with a paddle, but when it's dry you're probably better off to use a bucket trowel like that, or you can use a spade or shovel. And basically you want to get the mix nicely mixed up, so you can no longer differentiate between the cement and the sand. Okay, so when you've got your mix nicely mixed together so it's all the same colour, that's when you can start adding your water. Now obviously another way to do this, depending on how much you're mixing up, is to do it on a square spot board and use your shovel, because obviously in a bucket it's a bit more difficult. If you're doing it on a larger scale still, you can do a dry mix in a sand and cement mixer. Only issue with that is you can get little balls of sand and cement sticking together, and it's not great. If you're doing a large scale floor mix, your best bet, I've found from experience, is actually to order the stuff in pre-mixed. It'll come on the lorry, it's already mixed, you can have a retarder put in it, so it'll be up to 8 hours before it actually sets. But if you're doing smaller jobs or any kind of patch up job, then this is what you want. Now you only really want to be careful to add a small amount of water at a time before you continue with your mix. The idea, as the name suggests, of dry mix is when you've got enough water in this that you can squeeze the cement and the sand and it sticks together, then that'll be your dry mix. But at this stage, for this, because it'll still be quite wet on the dry on the bottom, you need to add a fairly reasonable amount of water and continue to mix that. You never want this mix to be runny in any description. It needs to look dry. Okay, apart from squeezing this together and seeing if it clumps, you can also press it down, give it a little rub up with your plastic float or your metal float. Right, for today's demo we're going to be doing a small area of floor, just to give you an idea of how you would go about this operation. Now what you do with this is similar to if you do a screed on a wall with the bonding, and then fill in between the two gaps to get your flat level, is you do a sand and cement screed along the edge, or along part of the edge. For this demo we're going to do a screed at the side and a screed along the back. I've pre-wetted the base floor as well, because you want to make sure that you get adhesion between your screed and your base. You can also treat the base first to make sure that you've got a good seal, but I always like to make sure I've got a little bit of water down there. Right, generally guys, you would rule these off with the spirit level, so you're getting your levels this way and this way. You can use a boat level across, a long level in the opposite direction. A mix you would normally do at least 4 inches deep to get a really sound base. If you do a sand cement screed too tight, like a couple of inches, you've got a good chance of it cracking or breaking up. So you're talking about between a 4 and a 6 inch screed. Obviously a 6 inch screed is going to use a lot more gear, but you have to take that into account. What you would generally try and do, once you've got these on a level, you don't have to, but you can. Just take your float over those. Another thing guys sometimes use are slippers, which basically you would tap those into the surface of your screed, so that when you're filling out an area in between whatever you're using to roll across will rest on top of your slippers, because when you're going across this, it's quite easy to dig into your sand and cement screed. But with slippers on there, that helps to take whatever area you feel. I mean, normally you'd have a screed along here, a screed along here. Actually, let's do that now. You can see at this point why this is called a dry mix, because to all intents and purposes, okay. So your other slipper would go there once you levelled these out. You would then fill your centre in. So we're a bit short on gear here. Still no finish, sadly, because the old coronavirus. You would normally compress this down as well, which you can do by treading it in. But you can see, guys, how the technique works here, and how if you've got slippers in there, whatever you're using to roll off, you can rest on those slippers. The gaps that these fill when you pick them up, you can easily fill back in. Then you take your plastic float, pop those out. Anywhere you've got little gaps, you can take some dry mix, put it over those gaps or holes. And you rub them in with a float. Now, an experienced floor layer will drop down a ton of this stuff, and with massive rules, they'll literally just rule it off and get it nice and level, without messing about with screeds or slippers or anything else. But if you're doing small areas, you're DIYing, then this is the technique to use. I mean, you can use this for patching up small holes as well. You don't want to pour sloppy sand and cement or concrete into a hole or into a void. If you're filling in, say, the bottom of a fireplace, this is your best mix to use. If you've got a bit of a hole there, mix up a dry mix. Make sure it will compress, put that into your hole, level it off, give it a rub up with your plastic float, when you've got it how you want it, then you can take a steel float over that, to give you your finish, because this will bring some of the moisture to the surface. This is basically how your dry mix works. The only thing you do need to make sure that it's more wet than it is dry. You're better if it's slightly wetter, you can still do this job. If it's a little bit too dry, it won't compact properly and it won't get a nice strong bond once all the moisture has evaporated out of it. But long story short, small demo of dry screed, a dry sand and cement mix. You can only really do this with coarse sharp sand. I don't know if from the video if you can see the little stones that are in it, but they give it its strength when it's compacted down and when you're rubbing it up with your float. As ever guys, thanks for subscribing, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, and hopefully I'll see you very soon in the next one. You take care, bye for now.